Hello there, my name is Kuma, and today we are having a close look at Delphine.
面白いですね。好き勝手に動く癖は忘れてください。躊躇は命取りになります。もう剣を抜いてもいいですか？
Delphine is a 5-star mystic caster and a welfare from chapter 13, all on top of being yet another cat in this game. But putting aside the exaggerated quantity of representatives in this race, Delphine has a lot of weird stuff going on with her. Mystic casters have a damage potential that is more complicated to calculate than usual, as we'll see later, and chapter welfares have an extra talent that only works in their home turf. A bonus talent by itself is not an issue, but the fact that you have to play through the entire chapter to unlock the operator and all of its potentials is quite the annoying design. You can't really get all the use you want out of the shiny new operator and its toy that will only work in the specific stages. Since Delphine exists for most of the time without her second talent, that's how I'll treat her today, mostly ignoring her second talent. So let us begin by pointing out the obvious. Mystic casters have a very high base attack, about double the value for core casters and chain casters, and about 50% more than true AoE branches, splash and blast casters. But they compensate for this very high attack with a very long attack interval, 3 whole seconds, and the fact that they can only attack a single enemy at a time. I have to bring this up because every Mystic caster so far other than Delphine compensates for their low ASPD in some way in their skills, something that Delphine doesn't seem to do at all. Yes, Delphine is different, but she's still the same at the end of the day. It's complicated. Let me explain. Her S2 gives her plus 100% attack, targets only enemies over 50% HP, and places a DOT on them that can stack up to 4 times. Ebenholz was the only Mystic caster who had an attack increase in his skill, but he also has an ASPD increase, because he's the 6 star, so he's here to have bigger numbers than the other members of the class. As for the others, Indigo and Harmony straight up lower their attack interval, and Iris has an AoE power strike that can bring her DPS up by a lot if you get the correct bursts, but it has a massive SP cost. If you try to calculate the damage for these ops, you will run into problems. Not so much for Ebenholz,
指示を聞こうか。
he's quite standard to calc, but the others have a bunch of conditions that you can't quite account for accurately, and even when trying to imagine the best case scenario, a lot of times things just fall apart. So instead of telling you the damage and DPS as usual, let's just look at all of them killing the same enemy. Which I should note is not the ideal scenario for Mystic casters. Other than Ebenholz, that is. His thing is killing big dudes. But we'll get to the ideal scenarios in a second. You will notice that for the most part, all of them seem to have almost the same single target DPS, which is super weird, because their skills don't work the same at all. Of course, the focus today is Delphine, so I won't go over every single one of them, but I at least want to show this comparison scenario so you can understand that this class is extremely specialized and talking about the damage they deal is very hard. So, Delphine, what is this girl supposed to do after all? She has that weird don't attack enemies under 50% HP thing. Why is that? It's quite simple. Delphine wants to use her S2 together with her talent to soften up a large amount of elites one at a time. In the ideal world, Delphine wants to hit a large enemy a couple times and let them walk away and die to the DOT, while she starts the process again with another enemy. While she definitely has a synergistic kit, with each saved up shot proccing the DOT ons, so that a fully charged staff will instantly proc it 3 times, with the attack increase of her skill making her DOT stronger, and each DOT stack lasting for the whole skill duration, as well as her first talent dealing extra damage to full HP enemies, so they can reach the 50% threshold quicker, Delphine fails to deliver in most situations for a simple reason. The numbers don't add up. Since Delphine does not have any kind of ASPD increase, and her skill only lasts for 30 seconds, she will only attack 10 times over her skill duration. And considering how crazy enemy HP numbers can be, she simply doesn't have enough hits to bring multiple elites down during her skill. But we can't just cry over spilled milk. Hypergriff wouldn't increase her skill duration even if we made a blood sacrifice. And you will find elites with lower HP that Delphine actually can realize her wet dreams on. She just won't be a shiny performer like Spectre or Mr. Nothing are. But now, let me talk practically for a little bit. For the most part, Delphine feels really good to play with. She won't be able to solo large waves of small enemies, and she definitely won't be able to solo bosses. But if you are playing like a normal human being, you'll have nothing to worry about. The high base attack of Mystic Casters is very satisfying to see, and any damage partner for Delphine will create a duo that just feels great. And that is because Delphine has the damage, she just doesn't have the burst. We are accustomed to operators working on bursts of damage. That's how I got to the conclusion on how Delphine's kit is supposed to work. But maybe that is just not the case and a steady DPS relying mostly on her base stats is what Delphine wants to do. That's not very exciting. True. And she doesn't have the characteristics of other operators with steady damage instead of bursts that you would usually think about, like Blaze for example. That is also true, but she still works. If you try to play with her in a random stage that doesn't have a massive boss looking down at you, or 10 waves of 50 shield guards each, which, as you should know, is most of the stages in the game, Delphine will work fine. And as you would guess, she demonstrates that very well in her home turf, chapter 13. Of course, in here her second talent suddenly exists, so I shouldn't mention what it does. But it's not very relevant, honestly. It just gives her a 20% damage increase against Sarkaz's enemies, so against everything relevant to her. And it also gives her an extra attack charge to be used only against Sarkaz's enemies. This extra charge is relevant in very specific situations. If you are getting a full hit on a big enemy during her skill, this will proc all 4 stacks of the Oteirons. And if you are trying to use Delphine to kill the chapter 13 slugs, something that you would color me impressed if you manage to do without instantly dying, she will get a permanent extra 30 SPD on her level 1 module, but she won't spend the special 4th charge. It's super pretty by the way, has a different color and everything. But while we're at this, let me explain the module. It gives Delphine 30 SPD if she has a charge stored. When leveling it up, it will increase the damage dealt to enemies over 80% HP, her first talent. What the module actually does is help Delphine recuperate charges. After she spends the full 3 seconds charging the first attack, she will only need 2.3 seconds for each of the other 2 charges. She's not really supposed to use the SPD to attack continuously. That explained, look at Delphine here. She does great against the chapter 13 elites. Chapter 13 lowered the enemy HP a little bit compared to what we've been seeing in chapter releases, which was quite comfortable to be honest. And that gives room for Delphine to actually put her strategy to use. Since the defenders have aggro increase, she can soften up a couple of them at a time, and after her skill ends, she can go back and finish off any of the ones that survived. If you can set up correctly, she will do great against the stun guys and the stealth elites as well. Let me repeat this. Lower HP elites, that's what Delphine likes to see. Having showed you all of this, I can now try to explain why is it difficult to talk about damage numbers for Mystic Casters. Maybe then you will give me a pass for not playing Spreadsheet Simulator with you today. Specifically, I will talk about Delphine since this is her video. But if you have a look at the other skits, you will find similar reasons. Delphine during her skill will have a double her attack. That's easy to calc. And having 4 stacks of DOT dealing a portion of her attack every second, that's also very easy to calc. If all I wanted to say is that against a big boss with way too much HP and nothing else in her range, Delphine can deal up to 57k damage, I could say that. But this is just not representative enough. Most of the time, Delphine will be attacking enemies that don't have enough HP to never get under 50% HP. And at that point, if you are considering a single target, her damage will go down, because she will stop attacking and only the DOT will deal damage. It's usually an easy standard to talk about single target DPS, even when looking at AoE operators, because if you have more targets, you just multiply the damage by the number of targets. In Delphine's case, you can't just do that, because if she has multiple targets, the max HP value of the targets matter in the calc of the damage. Lower HP enemies will get to 50% quicker. With less stacks applied, they will probably die, and the DOT damage won't count for the rest of the skill. And it's not as simple as saying that 57k is her ceiling either. If you have two elites with just enough HP in her range, she will bring one of them down to 50%. The DOT will proc until the end of the skill, and she will stack her DOT on the second enemy, while never ceasing her attacks. This brings her DPS way up. Do you see how complicated this is? We would need to craft in multiple different and specific scenarios to compare the Mystic casters. And honestly, at that point, playing Spreadsheet Simulator just doesn't have a point anymore. Might as well just record a bunch of practical examples. I know I drifted a little bit away from the usual today, so I will do a quick summary of what I said. Delphine is not a boss killer, and her performance doesn't feel great against single target high HP enemies in general, because her skill stops her from attacking after they reach half HP. So if they have too much HP, her damage will feel like it just stopped existing. She has a range of enemies that will die in a very satisfying manner to her skill, and the very high base attack from her class will do very well even when her skill is off. But these are not your shiniest situations. This makes Delphine into a nice everyday operator that you can comfortably take to most maps without regret, as long as you are not trying to solo slugs with her, that is. After all, she has low ASPD, and low ASPD ops with no AoE option don't deal well with big waves of trash enemies. Doesn't matter how high their attack is. Also, chapter talents are basically irrelevant. And if you think I'm wrong, you can tell me how in the comments. But that was Delphine. You can leave me a like if you enjoyed the review, and I hope everyone has a very nice day. Peace out.